welcome back to Sahara TV. We're now going to continue our segment on African refugees and migration all over the world. And right now we're going to be focusing on the treatment of Zimbabweans in South Africa. So with me on the line, I have Douglas Lefresche, a researcher and paralegal with PASSUP, or People Against Suffering, Suppression, Oppression, and Poverty, joining us on the line. Hello, Douglas.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being on with us today. Now, could you sort of talk about your work and what you do with migrants and refugees in South Africa?
Absolutely. PASSUP was created out of the xenophobic violence of 2008, which led to some camps and several deaths, and since then has become a leading voice for migrants and refugees in South Africa. And most recently, we conducted research along with the Solidarity Peace Trust organization on the process of deportation within South Africa, because the legislation is quite progressive, but in our experience, what's on paper doesn't end up turning into practice. So most recently, I was researching the process of deportation from arrest to detention to deportation.
And who are the groups being targeted for deportation and for harassment in South Africa?
Well, it's quite unfortunate. I mean, there's no organized way of guessing who's a foreigner and who's not, other than racial profiling. So if you're black, then you could be, and if you're of a darker complexion, then it's more likely to be, so then you're more likely to be questioned. But it depends too on the police at the time, and we found corruption was terrible. So if the police felt that they needed to earn some money, then they started harassing immigrants and getting bribes. But if they weren't being pushed by their seniors or superiors to arrest and deport, then everyone got along fine. But it's very random. There's no system in place.
Now, as far as black migrants or African refugees in South Africa, which countries are these refugees and migrants largely coming from into South Africa?
The vast majority of Zimbabweans, speculation is with the numbers, but it's anywhere from 2 to 3 million Zimbabweans in South Africa, most of which are not documented. Mm-hmm. And then I think the next highest is Somalians, and Congolese following close behind, with Nigeria and Malawi and Mozambique being the other countries.
Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing reports of Zimbabweans, especially. However, this could be applied to refugees and migrants in general. But Zimbabweans facing harassment and threats and violence and being forced to go back to Zimbabwe.
Yes, well, unfortunately, there's a lot of contention around the definition of who or what a refugee is. Mm-hmm. And Zimbabweans, because they do not come from a conflict-ridden area, do not fall under the UN definition of a refugee. And that's why they are, more than any other African country, end up undocumented. Mm-hmm. And they're the closest to South Africa, so there's the most of them in South Africa. So they're the largest number, and they're the most likely to not have documentation, which leaves them far more vulnerable than the others.
Mm-hmm. Now, the refugees, or it is an interesting question on what to even call these people. Are they refugees? Are they economic migrants? Some could say that the economic situation in Zimbabwe is forcing them into South Africa, so we should call them economic migrants. However, that would not afford them the same rights and recognitions that international law would give to refugees. So is it, is there an increased cultural or social discomfort with having Zimbabweans in South Africa now as opposed to before?
It is unfortunately a very contentious issue, and it has been since 2007, 2008, but I mean, essentially since the early 2000s when Zimbabwe's economy collapsed. And we advocate strongly that they're not economic migrants, but more refugees, because it's a result of their political situation. The fact that they're starving, the fact that they can't have, that they don't have jobs, that there's no productive land, that there's no access to running water in some places or sanitation, is often the result of the fact that that community or that district voted for the opposition, and so they get completely cut off. So we advocate for the fact that they are refugees, but when a government wants to look at its budget and decide how many people they're going to let in, they draw the line with the UNHCR at conflict-ridden areas. And so it is a very contentious issue in South Africa, and tensions with the foreigners since 2008 have been very high. Xenophobia just a xenophobic attitude is prevalent in South Africa, unfortunately, and we run integration workshops in the community and are constantly trying to educate people as to why someone is coming to South Africa, and that they're not just there to steal someone's job and home, that they're there to work and support their families, and often more than just their families.
Mm-hmm. Is that the sentiment? Is that the prevailing attitude that Zimbabweans are here to, quote unquote, steal South African jobs? Are there other fears underlying this new spate of xenophobia against Zimbabweans? Yes, it's jobs is the kind of the buzzword used by the politicians and by the businessmen who are losing out. Zimbabweans, for the most part, in the last 10 years, the Zimbabweans that have come across have been very well educated, and so in general don't compete with the large labor force South Africa has, which is largely uneducated. And so the Zimbabweans come in a level above where there's a huge need for them, and they fill a gap that doesn't necessarily take away the opportunity from South Africans, although in some cases it can. So it's used by community leaders or by politicians as a tool or an argument to help build the tensions and build the aggression against the foreigners. Now, could you tell maybe a little bit of your own work and your own experiences with some of the refugees, the migrants that you've worked with? What have been some of the what they go through on a daily basis, being afraid of attacks or violence or deportation? It's a very scary thing. They have to carry their original document with them at all times. And just in the off chance that someone asks them for their papers, but in the meantime, they're vulnerable, as is most, everyone in South Africa, vulnerable to crime, and they're taking public transport and working long hours. And if they lose that original document, if they were able to gain one, then they have no protections after that. Otherwise, they walk around. I met several Zimbabweans who carried a separate pouch of money that was specifically for when they got arrested, because they knew it was just a matter of time. It wasn't a case of if. It was just when they got arrested, they had money available to bribe the police. And the police, particularly in Johannesburg, developed the name in the late 2008, before the moratorium, developed the nickname, they called Zimbabweans ATM machines. Because if they needed some cash for the weekend, they could round up 20 Zimbabweans who they knew wouldn't be documented and knew would be desperate to stay, and bribe them and then let them go. And so this whole other culture, because all of the power is on the police and on the immigration officials. Once they're arrested and detained, there's no way of contacting a lawyer or getting any support. And so the power in their hands is way too much, and there's no accountability and no transparency. So they're just a law unto themselves. And when they need to actually arrest people, they do. Otherwise, they just use people for a little bit of extra cash. Wow, that was incredible. Is there any sort of legal recourse that some of these migrants, some of these people can look to? I mean, are there NGOs that are helping them out? Again, the situation is tricky under international law, depending on how they're defined, whether or not they're defined as refugees or as migrants, but do they have any sort of recourse in order to help their cause?
Yes, that's the frustrating thing is South Africa's law is unbelievably progressive compared to the rest of the world. And so should they be able to contact PASOP or several of the legal aid clinics, they are able to be assisted, because often the due process isn't followed, in which case the arrest becomes illegal in itself, and so they should be released. A large majority of the people we interviewed should have been released based on improper following of procedures. But the problem is they can't contact. Either they have to pay for the phone call, or the other problem is just the number of people being arrested and the number of people needing the legal support, and obviously none of them can afford to pay for it. So it's all legal aid, which puts a huge strain on the few legal aid NGOs that exist in South Africa and that are working for migrants. And so they find themselves in a situation where if an immigration raid is conducted and 50 people are arrested, they can maybe have the capacity to defend and support 3 or 4 people. And in reality, of those 50, maybe 1 or 2 will be able to get a word to their family members to say, I've been arrested, I'm going to be deported, I'm at this police station. And that's the only person who has a chance of getting out, because once they're in, if no one else knows they're there, or if they aren't able to contact anyone, there's no protecting them, even if they are full-on refugees with a legitimate case and legitimate documents that they left at home.
Wow. Now, again, I guess we come back to this idea of xenophobia in South Africa. Last week we had a guest on our show who claimed that xenophobia does not exist in South Africa, that South Africans are not xenophobic at all. Now, again, this case, your work that you're doing, proves that the opposite still might be true in South Africa.
Well, I don't want to make a mass generalization of the population.
Sure,
the xenophobic attitudes that we feel that we pick up on are from police and immigration officials, and there is xenophobic tension and xenophobic attitudes in amongst the community, but it isn't the general. I mean, we run integration workshops and community workshops all the time and have communities that everyone gets along very well, and everyone understands and accepts where people are from and why they're here. And so it certainly isn't anywhere near as bad as it was in 2008. And that's the problem, is it's become a bit of a populist tool for example, the xenophobic violence with Somali shop owners, because they've taken business away from South African shop owners. But essentially they're helping the South Africans because they open earlier and they sell cheaper food. So the public are happy to have them there, but the businessmen are losing out. And so they create this tension, and they build everybody up and get everyone aggressive, when in reality they're grateful for the fact that there's someone open at 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning to sell them coffee and bread. So I would agree that I don't think xenophobic, I don't think, on the whole, I don't think South Africa is a xenophobic country, but it is a dangerous tool that is and can be used by people with power and influence.
Great. Well, Douglas, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. We'll definitely be following up more on the plight of refugees and migrants in South Africa, but it was great to have you on today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.